ratings and reviews are incredibly important for ASO. Because let's be honest, most of us probably wouldn't download an app that is rated less than 3 stars unless it's as big as Instagram or Facebook and we knew what we were getting. That's why it's important to have great reviews. And I know that in the beginning, it's really hard not to just call all of your friends and family and make them download your app, rate it with 5 stars, and praise it in the review. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of developers who do this to gain initial traction for their app or their game, and I'm not here to judge. If you want to do it, go right ahead. But I want you to keep something in mind. What if you get 10 of your friends to rate your app with 5 stars, and then 1,000 people download it? What's going to happen is these people will have certain expectations for your app because of the rating, which is probably not 100% honest. So what's going to happen is these people are going to expect a 5-star app. And if that's not exactly what they're getting, then the reviews they write are going to be harsh. And they will drag down your overall rating immensely, so that it is virtually impossible for you to correct it by telling a few more friends to rate it 5 stars. So my advice to you is, don't try to scam the market. It's kind of like in a casino. The market is the house, and in the end, the house always wins. As I've said times and times before, the most important thing is the quality of your app. And if it is good enough, the real reviews will show that. If not, then maybe you need to improve it. And that should always be your goal. Most app developers dream about selling their app to some big company or getting investors. But nobody will buy your app or invest in your company if the quality is not absolutely compelling. There aren't any shortcuts, and I can't give you any. We are not saying do this and you will get 1 million downloads for your app. We are saying that if you stick to this plan and constantly improve while having a great product, then success is almost guaranteed. Your goal should always be to remain above a solid 4-star rating, because once it drops under 4 stars, only about 50% of the people will still consider downloading your app. Another factor you should keep in mind is the size of your app. You should always make sure that the app is roughly under 100 megabytes big, because this way people are more likely to download it on a go and not have to wait for Wi-Fi connections. About 98% of all apps in the top 100 are under 100 megabytes in size. And again, it's just for most people, they have a certain data plan and they might not want to spend all of their data on your game, which is why sometimes it is like this. Let me show you an example, or let me tell you a story. Imagine I see your app on the App Store because it looks like a great game and I want to download it. So I open up a tab and I see, oh, it's about 500 megabytes in size. So I say to myself, okay, I might just not download it now because, I don't know, I might be on the train or something. I'll download it later at home. Then half an hour passes, I get home, connect to Wi-Fi, and don't download your app because I totally forgot about it. And that's the problem. Most people don't have that much of an attention span anymore in our society. So always make sure that your app, your game, or whatever you're trying to get people to download on the App Store is under 100 megabytes in size. Let's talk about updates. Updates are important, not only because you improve your app and it adds to user satisfaction, it's also a great way of getting your app into the updates list in the App Store. And just imagine, you have this game installed and maybe you have a lot to do, a lot of work, and you forget about the game. So someday you open up the App Store and you see, okay, there are like 3 updates available. And you see our game is among those updates. And then you remember all the fun you had with the game. And then you might be intrigued to find out, oh, let's see what the update actually is. Is it more levels? Is it some new features in our game? And you might be intrigued to give the game another shot. And that's how we get more daily active users to really return to our app, which is why updates are great for this. And another tip is that Apple always appreciates it when you are improving and updating your app, because it shows that you are committed to your product. But how many times should you update your app? Well, it depends, of course, on the quality of your app. If there aren't any flaws or errors, then I think once a month is fine. Innovation is key. It's quite unlikely that your app is perfect as is. There's always room for improvement and innovation, and that should be one of your top priorities when you want to create a successful app and maintain it as such. If you have an error in your app or some kind of bug, then it's imperative that you update your app as fast as possible. And another factor that comes to mind when thinking about updates is how much time you have and how much time you want to invest in your app, since updates and adding new features do take time. But unless there's a major flaw or security risk in your app, any update frequency between once a week and once a month is totally fine. I just want to really recommend that you think about updates and think about how to improve your app on a regular basis. Let's talk about app localization. When you localize your app, you basically translate the entire app, and by doing so, you create a much larger audience for your app. There are certain things you have to keep in mind when thinking about localization though. First, even though a lot of people speak English, there's a lot more that don't. And depending on your app, it can be incredibly hard to translate the entire thing. That's why I always suggest that you design your app in a way that symbols can be used to tell the user a lot about the functionality of your app or your game. Just think about it. If you use words for your navigation, for example, and you want to publish your app in another country, you have to translate them for any language. However, if you have symbols instead, they are usually internationally recognizable, and people all over the world will be able to use your app. This doesn't work for all the apps, of course, but it's something to really keep in mind while designing it. And it also, in my opinion, it looks better if there are symbols and the app isn't, or at least the navigation bar isn't cluttered with words. If your app does work with symbols, there's something else you can do to boost your audience. You can localize your app listing, meaning the App Store listing. So your keywords, descriptions, and all of that. In my opinion, that's always a great thing to do because it allows you to speak to a greater audience without having to create many different versions of your app. Also, it's much easier to have someone translate your App Store listing instead of all of the words inside of your app itself. But in the end, it depends entirely on your marketing plan and strategies. What are the markets that you want to hit first? The US market is probably the most important. Just think about how often an app becomes popular in the US, and then a few weeks later, the hype transfers to Australia, Canada, Europe, and then finally Asia. That's why I think it's completely fine and the right move to make sure that in the beginning, your app works in your language and your target market, and then branch out when it becomes successful. There are lots of examples where literal giants in the app business didn't branch out for a long time. Take Instagram, for example. They still don't have a working desktop app for all devices and don't allow users to schedule posts from their desktop, which is weird since they are owned by Facebook, where this has been possible for years. So what this shows us is that we should always, in the beginning especially, focus on one target market. Become successful in one market and then branch out. Don't try to conquer the world all at once.